Hi everyone, welcome to a video I put together for the Victoria Condominium relating to the beach erosion. I did this on February the 5th, 2018. We did it at the Pool and Cabana area. Here are some shots of the Victoria Beach area. You can see here the steps, the new steps that have been added at the bottom of our access to the beach. Here's a shot of the beach, and you can see some of our beach erosion. This was shot on February the 5th at about 9 o'clock in the morning, so the tide was going out. These sea creeps over here are actually not dead, they're just coming back now, and they will come back. We've lost a considerable amount of beach. You can see our building up there on the right, and you can also see here where the dark area is that the surf has actually gotten up that far to the beach area, and so it's they're saying that the beach is eroding at about 1.8 feet a year. So unless we begin to do something about this beach area, we could lose a considerable amount of beach in the next few years, and that's not what we want. That's not why we moved here. So it is something that is going to be escalated to the top of the list of things to look into. And James Gray from the city of Vero Beach, Indian River County, actually, he's the coastal engineer, and he's in the coastal engineering division of Indian River County. He's going to explain on this video a bit about the beach erosion, what we can do about it, what the city can provide for us, what the county can provide for us, what Indian River Shores can do for us, and so forth. It's a little complicated. You may have to look at it a couple of times, but it'll give you a good idea. If you need to reach him, you can get him at 772-226-1344. That's at the Indian River County offices. And I'm Ron Crider. I put the video together. I live in 204 in Victoria. If you have any questions, please feel free to give me a call at 772-913-2209. Here is Diana Stark. She is going to be the MC, if you will.
Owners, guests, and speaker, James Gray. This is James. We are delighted that our neighbors to the south came from Ocean Colony with incoming board president Rod Foster, and also the fountains to the north represented by Dr. Walter Scott. Interestingly, Dr. Scott lived here 20 years ago in the Victoria.
And was in charge of getting all the copies that you see consistently in that.
Yes. I'd also like to introduce Chad Goff, a new owner to Victoria. This is Chad. And he's working hard with me to spearhead support from everyone in and outside of our community. And of course we welcome other communities here as well. I know Sea-Watch, the Shores are here, so thank you too for coming. We're all affected. We ask that you please sign our contact sheet and be part of our strong team. We need everyone. And thanks to Orrin Deacon, who found our plat showing that Victoria has about 400 feet of shoreline. Of course, a very special welcome to our speaker today, James Gray, Indian River County's coastal engineer for the last 15 years, and most recently the Natural Resources Manager. James has an incredible in-depth background to help us. He's responsible for coordinating shoreline preservation and natural resources enhancement programs. I slept with these titles last night. Throughout the county, including, I'm not finished, design evaluation, securing and administering grant funding, which we're all very interested in, construction oversight of beach restoration, dune maintenance, shoreline stabilization, and artificial reef construction projects. As a side note, I asked James how he likes to have fun. He said he spends time with his family, enjoys all Florida's natural resources he strives to protect, and plays an occasional round of golf.
Terrible.
Finally, I should add that James gave me a great one-on-one crash course on dune erosion. Now listen, from 3-to-1 dune sloping to the importance of changing our designation to critically eroded beach, to the cost of sand, $25 per cubic foot, to possibilities for funding. I certainly learned a lot, and I know you will here today too. Our format today is that James will have open discussion and ask for your questions. And along the way, he'll give you the course that he gave me a little bit. He'll be happy to visit the shoreline with anyone who would like to do so after our discussion. Be assured you'll be glad you came. Please welcome James Gray.
I'm going to stand up front so you guys can all see me. So today's presentation essentially is going to be an informal discussion. So at any time, if you have a question, I like that interaction, so you're not going to slow me down or I'm not going to get frustrated. So if a certain item that I'm talking about, you'll have more information you want, let me know, and I'll stop and we'll answer questions. So essentially, let me give you a little history on the county's beach preservation program. So we follow the county's strategic beach management plan is what we call our beach preservation plan. And the county is divided up into 8 separate sectors or management sectors. And a number of the sectors are erosional, a number of them are accretional, some of them are relatively stable. So for the past 15 or so years, we've been actively managing, and I say actively by placement of sand, on those critically eroded sections of shoreline. So currently, the critically eroded shoreline designation is being administered through DEP. So we get that information, or we send them information based on shoreline data. They come back, they do an evaluation, and they say, yes, your shoreline is eligible to be designated as critically eroded. So the county's shoreline, we have 22.5 miles of shoreline, of which 70% or 15 miles or thereabouts are currently designated as critically eroded. So that's pretty high for our shoreline. The main reason is we have an extremely narrow beach profile. So with the narrowness of the beach profile, we're more subjected to wave impacts and so forth. So if you look at Sebastian Inlet working your way south, again, 70% of that shoreline is erosional. The areas that are not deemed critically eroded are the areas such as South Beach and also Round Island, where there's a ginormous wide beach, highly accretional. That's just the way the shoreline morphology, essentially the position of the shoreline and so forth, affect how that beach kind of interacts with the surf and the high surf or hurricanes or just natural sediment transport. So obviously the purpose of discussion today is Sector 4. Sector 4 is about a 2-mile stretch of beach. It's all within the town of Indian River Shores. Essentially where we begin is in Johns Island, making our way down to essentially this area, or Tracking Station Beach Park, just a little bit north. So again, entirely within the Indian River Shores jurisdiction. The county typically is the local sponsor of beach management in the county. So what that means is we would be going after, or we would be the liaison for the town in this situation under that capacity of a local sponsor. So we'd be contacting DEP on your behalf, Town Manager Robbie Stabe, and the county have been in constant conversations recently, and so forth, about this very subject of designating the shoreline as critically eroded, or at least attempting to make that designation a reality. So what does that mean, designation of critically eroded? In order to become eligible for state funding, and this is legislative or also through their beach management program ranking system, we request funding annually. There's a local government funding request grant application that's submitted. annually for our other sections that are critically eroded. So recognizing as, or DEP recognized this area as a critically eroded area, we'd be eligible again for grant funding. Currently, we do not have that designation, so essentially the statutes preclude us, Florida statutes preclude us from requesting that type of funding for beach repair. So, yes.
Jim, that's for track 4.
Yes, Sector 4 is entirely, and actually a little bit southern portion of our Sector 3, and the entire Sector 4 section is not designated critically eroded.
Not to jump ahead, but
No,
a letter
sorry.
has been written and sent to the county asking for that change?
Yes, so I'll get into that in a
Okay,
second.
sorry.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So obviously we don't have that designation currently. We've contacted the state to say, okay, how do we move forward in this process and designation process? The administrator of the program, the coastal engineering administrator, basically said it's a relatively simple step. We write a letter to DEP, and we ask them to do an evaluation of the shoreline.
How long does the evaluation then take?
The evaluation will probably take about, depending on how much material they have, beach surveys and so forth, the evaluation could take a couple weeks.
Weeks?
Yeah, so we're at that point. So why we hadn't had this designation in the past? Because that might be a question before we get into the next phase of this operation. In the past, the shoreline has actually gone through several changes, significant changes actually in the grand scheme of things. Originally, the shoreline was stable. So from 1972 was when the beach program with the state actually began, where they were monitoring on a regular basis. It was annually, every few years, or whatever the situation was. 1972 was the baseline profile. So from 1972 to 1986, with all of the survey data evaluated and so forth, this beach Sector 4 area was actually considered stable. So no real issue or concerns to make it a designated critically eroded shoreline. So from 1986 to 2005, we were not impacted greatly. You know, from hurricanes, we had over 4 hurricanes and everything else. But prior to that, this is the average shoreline data over that period of time from 1986 to 2005, and again, further, 1972 to 2005, the beach actually reversed and it was actually on an accretional trend. So again, there was no real need or reason for the state to, and I'll get to in a second, the state to really make that further determination. Until recently, based on our last beach preservation plan update, which in the past was every 10 years, and now we're on a 5-year cycle to update our strategic beach management plan. So from 2005 to current, actually when we evaluated data 2013 and subsequent with more monitoring data, the beach has reversed again. Now it's gone to an erosional trend. So if you follow back, historically, stable, accretional, erosional. So there's clearly a trend change. So with going back to that letter, now we have clear data to support requesting the state to make that determination. So again, following back with that determination, what would that benefit this community or this section of shoreline? That would make it eligible for funding from the state. Now, I don't want to mislead you with the funding, and I'm sure we'll have more discussion on funding and how that relates to this section. But going back to what I had mentioned with submitting grant applications, local government funding requests to the state, there are certain criteria that we have to follow to make us eligible for or higher ranking in points. One of them being beach access, severity of erosion. We'd have no beach access, really. Beachcomber is an access, but it's not. Tracking Station Beach Park is a primary access, so about a half a mile up the beach is eligible based on the statutes and everything else, but Beachcomber is not. It's really a walkway, you know, walk access to the beach. There's no bathroom facilities, there's no public benefit, essentially. Even though there are benefits to get to the beach, there's no benefit. And that's where the funding concerns become state. The other area, what I had mentioned, among others, where you would rank higher in the points with the severity of erosion. And this area is actually seen, based on that trend, erosional trend, we're actually seeing about 1.8 feet per year erosion. So the dune system and everything else, so in 10 years, that's 18 feet of dune retreat, or something along that average. So that's pretty massive, and severe. Considering that we already have a narrow beach, now you're narrowing it even more. You're deflating the beach, or the conditions have deflated beach berm systems and so forth, where they're flat, allowing waves to kind of come in closer, meaning high water is now pushed more close to the dune line. These are all enhancements to that, again, that designation request. So, yes?
What area closest to us on either side has already been declared critical? How far that way, how far that way?
Okay, great question. So, our
Could you repeat
area...
the question?
I'm sorry.
Could you repeat?
Okay,
I said, how close to where we're sitting, on the south side, the north side, has been declared critical already?
Okay, so we're surrounded by Sector 3 and Sector 5, obviously. So the beaches, northern Johns Island, about maybe 1,000, 1,500 feet is the northern portion of the critically eroded boundary. And then the southern portion is actually kind of around Sea-Watch, a little bit around that area.
They've already been declared critical.
From R70, yeah, so DEP goes on, DEP goes by reference monuments. So this 2.5 stretch of beach has no designation whatsoever. Everywhere surrounding it makes up that 70%
Their beach
of
is
it.
also very narrow, and
Yes,
so one reason why they became critical,
yes,
and erosion.
correct. So, and again, the trend, that shoreline data that I had gone through, the surrounding beaches were actually erosive prior to, or at the time they were evaluated, whereas this didn't meet that criteria. So, next step, where are we at now with the letter or the request to DEP and so forth? Well, Town Manager Robbie State and the County Administrator and county staff met with our chairman, board chairman, Commissioner O'Brien, and one of your town council members, Mr. Oshner, and we went through the next steps. How are we going to send a request letter? The town subsequently sent a letter to the county requesting assistance.
And I put a copy of the letter on a lot of the chairs.
Okay. So that letter in there obviously was a framework of our discussions and a result of some of the discussions. And where we're going forward now is actually on the 13th, we have another letter prepared, an actual letter to DEP requesting from the county, assuming the role as the local sponsor, which is in the board memo and so forth. We are, based on the direction from our county administrator, Jason Brown, the county is recommending that we assume the role. Of course, the board has to accept it and everything else, our commission. But that letter will be transmitted the 13th or thereabouts of February to the state. So the clock will start essentially with that designation request at the end of February, and hopefully we'll have a determination somewhat in March. Bless you. Thank you. So that's the quick and down and dirty summary. Yes, ma'am.
What is the federal government's role in beach preservation? Is there not a national shoreline?
Okay, so the federal government's role, based on past and current relations that we've had with FEMA, essentially, and I'm going to talk to FEMA because we don't have federal beaches in the county. We have no designated federal beaches. There's a number of reasons why, but mainly the county decided not to participate in that federal participation of funding for a number of reasons. The cost of benefits and things of that nature weren't high enough to move into that relationship. So the county is actively just going to be managing it along with the state. So from the federal side, we are only dealing with FEMA. So FEMA has a category of funding, and hurricanes Francis and Jean in 2004 qualified for this funding. Hurricane Matthew, currently, we're looking to participate in a federal FEMA funding for Irma as well. But they look at it as an engineered beach, so it has to be an actively local sponsored section of shoreline that we, the county or other municipalities, participate in this local sponsorship. If that's the case, then it's classified and deemed, yes, it is engineered beach, and we can move forward with some federal participation through FEMA. And FEMA, as with Hurricane Matthew and the previous project worksheets, is what they develop. They will fund the project to a point where it only funds back the replacement of sand that was lost. So storm losses are the only component, because there's other erosion rates and things that have to get stripped out. So not getting into the weeds a little bit, but FEMA doesn't always restore. Like if we put 500,000 cubic yards out, let's just say, for example, 3 years later, we had a hurricane, we were impacted, FEMA will not give us funding to replace 500 cubic yards. It will be based on whatever erosion rate that we've had. In this area, it's about 15,000, 16,000 cubic yards per year or so. So 40,000, 50,000, somewhere around that would be subtracted as background erosion. So that's kind of the FEMA federal participation.
I think you answered the question. I was wondering what the starting point was for erosion if we get this designation.
The starting point would be based off of our surveys that we have. So the 30 years, 40, 50 years of survey data, they'll review that, and that will be the analysis. So our starting point will essentially be where our position of the shoreline, most recent survey, which was done this past summer, would be the baseline. And we're actually doing another survey the end of this month, early into March.
So it wouldn't necessarily include the damage done by Matthew?
It includes all of Matthew. We have survey all of Matthew. We have all of Irma. Post Irma, we did a survey immediately following Hurricane Irma. The department has that information, and then any new information survey-wise, we're still collecting. So, and that would be the end of this month. But that's all important data. But I think we have enough data to support or to reiterate the previous reversal that I was talking about with erosion, which is important for us moving forward. Okay.
Bottom line, the worst case scenario, if we have to pay this, I know that's a question everybody's been asking me. Bottom line, worst case scenario, as I understand, it would be 60 to 70,000 for the sand. I tried to learn my course, the gray course, and $10,000 to $15,000 for a contingency fee. Plus, we need to replant sea grapes or sea grasses, whatever is suggested. Just bottom line, is that what everybody kind of wants to know too? I hope.
Well, let me just ask this question to your statement. You're talking about
400
Victoria.
feet of Victoria Shoreline.
400
feet. Just that'll give us
Okay.
a sample.
Okay, so
That is for dunes or just replenishing the actual beach itself?
okay, I was just gonna get to that. So good added,
Right.
and that's perfect. We're on the same wavelength. So from the dune perspective, the state authorized the county through an emergency final order to issue emergency permits post Hurricane Irma and Matthew and some previous storms. Normally, the state is the regulatory agency, so they have to review all of the permits and everything else requests on a larger scale and on a smaller scale. But because of the emergency final order, the county was able to issue emergency permits. Now, what that restricted us to do was just doing projects along the dune. So we'll start with the dune only, as far as an estimated cost and so forth. With 400 feet of shoreline, I believe the permit that we issued you was somewhere in the neighborhood about 1,500 cubic yards. You figure about $20 to $30 a cubic yard, somewhere around there. You know, we're looking probably in that $50,000 to $60,000 range for that material, based on the current numbers that we're hearing from the industry. The sand supplies have been reduced or they're being utilized. So there's a little bit of a, what I'm hearing, markup because of that. There's not many sand suppliers currently supplying the material because we've used them for various reasons, or they're doing some other, the developments are really high right now, site development, so they're using, the materials for that reason. And then also beach sand is a specific sand quality, the consistency, the quality of the sand because of sea turtles and other environmental factors, it has to meet stringent guidelines. So because of that, it's limited and so forth. So somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000 to $60,000 is what would be an estimate. Perhaps it'd be lower, hopefully, but access is limited, so that factors into mobilization costs and so forth, and that's where we came up with that number. Yes, ma'am?
In terms of, we're talking about the Victoria, if we don't get any support north of us and south of us, does it hold up for the Victoria? In other words, is this a thing that one community can do as a one-off community, or do we need to get support all through Sector 4?
Okay.
In order to
So-
have it be worthwhile, in other words, stabilizing
Correct.
the erosion?
Another excellent question, and we've had similar questions. I see a lot of familiar faces and so forth. So end losses are a factor and a consideration. So if you have one home, 100 square foot or 100 linear feet of shoreline, and two homes north and south of you, that home in the middle, without a reasonable amount of sand placement, more than likely will erode a lot faster because of what's called end losses. So you would have to design a project that had that in mind, and you would just do a smaller scale project. I think for Victoria's shoreline being about 400 feet or so forth, you can kind of anticipate end losses by changing the template, the fill template. So essentially meaning the last 50 feet north and 50 feet south or thereabouts, you can taper it into the dune line, you reduce the likelihood of it sticking out further and so forth. So there's ways to work around that. But yes, more continuous project is more beneficial to the whole entire beach system. So getting back into the connectivity of the large scale beach project. So small scale dune only construction. And that's all you're authorized to do. Anyone at this point is authorized to do under the emergency final order permit. Moving into the large scale beach project, that's a different type of permit. So placement below mean high water is now involving the federal agencies in the permitting. So National Marine Fisheries, Fish and Wildlife, the Army Corps of Engineers, anything above mean high water is just the state of Florida with consultation with FWC for sea turtle impacts.
How optimistic are you that we will get funding for the Section 4?
Okay. It's going to be challenging. I'll put it bluntly, it is going to be challenging because of access. So it is going to be difficult. That's where this community gets involved and actually petitions to our local elected officials also are, which you've done. You can see that case in point with the letter exchange and so forth. The next steps, not that I'm promoting lobbying and anything else of that nature, but we have other representation. We have senators, or a senator and a representative. Those are the types of people that need their message to be broadcasted. They work for us, right? They're elected officials. So finding the need for beach restoration, there could be special legislative appropriations that are through the legislative session that could be enhanced. This year, there probably wouldn't be damages, so there could be funding. I don't want to say there is going to be.
Question?
Yes. Which?
So, what can we do? We have already asked you one time, and I believe you were the gentleman who said that one thing we can do is when God provides us with seaweed, which it does occasionally that comes in from the sea, that we can pitchfork or break that seaweed into the dunes, and that's helpful and protected. Then another thing I've done is I've walked all the way up and down the shore trying to look at who is protecting their dunes most effectively. And the people that seem to have done this best are Bermuda Bay and a portion of a small area in Johns Island where they're using something that looks something like these hedges out here rather than seagrasses on the edge of the dunes. So what do you recommend that we do in the interim while we're trying to get federal or state support to help us nourish the dunes?
Okay. So what I would recommend, based on the, and we'll look at this in a couple minutes or thereabouts, the current condition, but the previous condition about a week or so ago, based on my recollection, sand for Victoria, now we're talking Victoria, just for everybody's benefit here. I would recommend putting some sand out because you're trying to protect your primary dunes. So this vegetation, the sea grapes, which you see behind us, and perhaps anything on the seaward side of the sea grapes, that vegetation you really want to maintain and protect. So any more erosion of that hardwood dune is going to continue to cause, with the elevation, the narrow beach, and so forth. So with that being said, again, placement of sand in concert with some vegetation, more of the grassy types of vegetation. The grassy vegetation would be the grassy. So
But
sea
that
oaks.
seems to be washed away.
It does.
This other vegetation seems to stay because it has deeper roots.
Correct, and there's reasons behind, you want to come up with an actual landscape plan, essentially, to revegetate your dunes. In this situation, your upper portion, or the area that wasn't necessarily impacted by the storm or the erosion, you'd really want to focus in if there's any holes in here. And I haven't been up on the top, but if there's any gaps, in vegetation, you really want to put some of the, and again, you have a very healthy dune system here with sea grapes. You want to put sea grapes back in, some of the hardwoods, to hold that other sand. And on the seaward side, once you've, again, fortified your primary dune and so forth, grassy vegetation is recommended because it does collect the wind-blown sand and so forth, especially if you're going to place sand out here. You want to maintain that with wind, you want to collect that and keep that in the dune system. So that's important. And I can go through, when we're out there, we can kind of look at any gaps and such and enhance that.
How do sand fences work?
Sand fences, they've been used in the past. It's a special permit that has to be done by DEP. I can't issue that. But essentially, they're like, does anybody know what a groin is or what have you? So a shore perpendicular structure or fence or what have you, they collect based on the prevailing wind, let's just say this time of year is north, east, it would be collecting, put in a position that it would be collecting sand on the northeast side. So it does work, it's taking essentially sand, or it has the opportunity to take sand from other portions of the beach. So depending on how big it is, a groin, for example, extending further out offshore is not necessarily the best thing for your neighbors to the south. Sand fences don't necessarily do that. Also, another way to make an artificial sand fence, essentially, is positioning your vegetation in a way that, it's like a groin, a natural groin, or a vegetated groin. So it could collect on this windward side of the vegetation. You'll have a buildup of sand there. So that's a natural way to.
I understand what you're saying. What you're saying is that at our south end, since our prevailing winds are from the northeast, on our south end, we should have more vegetation out there and it would naturally collect sand in front of it. Is that the idea?
Well, it could be positioned in a way, not to be misleading, but again, if you have vegetation that's kind of sticking out, it would replicate a groin or sand fence, where sand fencing is challenging to get a permit. So if that's what you're interested in, that's the way to do that application. But vegetation will also, not in any position or whatever, could also have that similar effect with wind changing directions and everything else. So I just use that as an example, but we can go out there and we'll look at it. And
what about pitchforking seaweed on?
Yep, I was just getting to that. So the seaweed on the dunes or algae that washes up off the reef and so forth, typically it's not in large quantities. Yes, typically. So atypically, this past storm season, Irma and so forth, because the hurricanes were all Caribbean type hurricanes and so forth, it broke a lot of the reef algae from the Caribbean off And also, unfortunately, we're dealing with a lot of trash because, well, there's a lot of trash in the ocean. So what we saw the accumulations were because the wind was blowing out of the northeast pretty much right after Hurricane Irma and so forth, and continued for a few weeks thereafter. All of that now flotsam essentially washed the shore, and high concentrations of trash embedded in that vegetation. So that's the typical stuff you want to remove off the beach because there's undesirables in there, you know, and being from New Jersey and so forth, you know, I'll mention it. Potential for needles, potential for anything else. So you want to be cautious dealing with that type of debris because there could be, you know, materials in there that you really don't want to interact with.
So suppose you actually go through and pick out the materials that are not seaweed in it, which is what we've been doing, and
Yes.
then toss it up on.
That's fine, as long as it's removed from debris, you know, and everything else. That's natural vegetation. Well, it is natural vegetation and natural nourishing too, fertilizer. So that material along the dune face, now the discarded dune face or what have you, covered up sand naturally or by, you know, placement of sand, could actually promote vegetation and enhance the vegetation. Sometimes when you have these offshore, I mean, it's all relatively within the same hemisphere, but there could be some other exotics washing in and planting, so you might get a weird tree or a weird vegetation or some point, but not in large concentrations. But yeah, so burying that vegetation is recommended typically because of that fertilizer, but you don't want to bury the trash because that becomes an issue 10, 5, a year, whatever the frequency is down the road. So yes, and then
James, you talked about beach access being an obstacle in terms of getting sand. So help me try to understand. The county commissioners approved by a 5-0 vote dune replenishment for Porpoise Point, which is all the way down the south end of the county. I drove my car down to Round Island Beach. I walked up 2.5 miles from the end of Round Island Beach to Porpoise Point. There was not a single public access point. In a similar fashion, the following day, I parked my car at the last northern beach access, which is on the road where 7-Eleven is, south of 17th Bridge. That is a 2.25 mile walk. No public access. So you're looking at just under 5 miles of no public access. We certainly have more public access than that. So how could they get sand whereas it might be an obstacle for us here?
Okay, great question. I'm glad you brought it up, just so there's clarity among everyone in this room, and now it's being taped so we can be on record. So Sector 7 was critically eroded. It was actually one of the most erosive sections of beach. Porpoise Point, it's a headland feature, kind of what I was talking about before with sand. Well, there's a case in point, natural example. The shoreline sticks out there, so it erodes faster. It's called a headland. So that 2-mile stretch of beach, you're correct, does not have any public access. So it enhances the statements I said before about state funding. Because there's no public benefit, we do not receive any state funding, or we are not eligible to submit grant applications for state funding through the local government funding request system. Because of 04 hurricanes, we were able to, the county received legislative funding on the order of about $10 million with a 10% match. So the county had to match $1 million of that funding. We had a little bit left over. We actually restored some of this shoreline as well with that money. We did do dune projects back in 04, or 05, actually 06. And so we all benefited. The whole entire county benefited. Sector 7, because there was a large amount of money left, because of the limitations with how much emergency sand we can put back, we weren't doing a large-scale beach project in this area. We couldn't because we didn't have the permits and so forth. Sector 7 was already under permitting at the time of the hurricanes. So we were able to amend that grant agreement, legislative appropriation, to restore Sector 7 beaches. So in absence of that, the county would have been 100% funding that section of shoreline. This coming project that we're planning now in South County, again, we were looking at it from the project was restored in 07. We hadn't looked at another project since then. However, Hurricane Irma and Matthew impacted us. We have federal funding or some assistance on a $2.5 million mark, so we've accelerated the permitting because we're leveraging now federal dollars to pay for a project that has no state or federal funding. So to go back to your statements as far as access and so forth, we would be in a similar situation with Sector 4, where there's access to the north and south of you and so forth, but it's really the immediate project area and anything outside of the project area where there's different accesses where people, again, tracking station is an example. I used a half a mile north is the statute because it's a primary access. Smaller accesses are a quarter mile. So from tracking station, half a mile up or thereabouts is around Sea-Watch. There's nothing from Sea-Watch north that would be influencing where we can get public benefit
What about the
calculations.
Beachwood access?
It's not public.
What about Beachcomber?
Beachcomber doesn't qualify because it's too small. There's really no parking spots.
Well, we're
So-
changing that. We're getting an on-demand pedestrian light at the town hall, so you only have to walk a block up and there's plenty of parking. So that's supposed to be installed in the next several months.
Okay, and still, they base it on the opportunity for public to get to the beach. So the number of parking spots, bathroom facilities, et cetera, et
So
cetera.
is this a campaign we need to mount, which would be making the case that with the new light, the Beachcomber becomes a public access?
I mean, it's a good to have more access, but that's not going to give you enough access to get any funding. If it were any funding, you'd probably have maybe 0.5% or 1% of funding. So we'd still 99%, let's just use that argument, of locally funded. And that's where the participation with the county and the town could perhaps get together and work on things. Legislative funding, we can come into it. It's just right now, Sector 4, Sector 7 are areas of beach, or Sector 4 can't do any funding. Sector 4, until it's critically eroded, Sector 7 is really our only beach that has no public access where we're funding in some frequency, leveraging dollars that we're getting from the state. And we're fortunate leveraging dollars, but and typically we would. Yes.
It seems like the short-term object is to have sand replenishment. Has there been any thought about long-term, like seawalls, or having additional jetties, or sinking a ship? Several weeks ago, off the shore of Louisiana, they've been doing this for quite some on PBS. They were showing where they got some stakes going along the shoreline, and they've been dumping Christmas trees along into these carriage type of things to prevent erosion, and apparently it's working. And of course, we don't have a lot of Christmas trees in this part of it. But is there some long-term thinking about something, besides sand replenishment that washes away after a hurricane or something?
Okay, so longer term, or looking at beach management in general, that's a good segue into kind of explaining. So there's hard solutions through armoring, seawalls, jetties, groins, that nature, and then there's soft solutions as far as adding sand to the system. So we'll start on hard armoring. So a seawall, it protects it's shore parallel, it protects the upland property. Essentially, that's what a seawall does. However, in these kinds of conditions, our beaches and other beaches throughout the state or what have you, or country that have seawalls and so forth, it amplifies the wave activity. So it potentially creates a higher erosion rate. Typically, it creates a higher erosion rate. It's put in there for a reason. It was high erosion before that. Well, now it's amplified because of, you're that close to the beach, you have less of a berm system and so forth. So that's not necessarily an area that you would want to look at as enhancing a dune. It only detracts from the dune or the beach. You lose sand, typically, from a seawall. But you're armoring, you're protecting your property. So
And Corpus Point has seawall.
highly erosive area, Sector
you're
5,
putting sand
City
down
of
there.
Riverbed. Okay. So, and it's one of the reasons why we put sand in there to enhance it. So looking at it from that perspective, seawalls, again, hard armoring potentially causes downward erosion. Groins, shore perpendicular structures going out into the surf. Same thing with the sand fence. It's going to collect sand on the prevailing currents, prevailing side, enhance the beaches to the north. Now what it does is it defers essentially, or sand starves the areas to the south. So groin systems aren't necessarily their last resort. In turtle situations, we can't really put groins out here because we have a high nesting density, but it creates these little pocket beaches. So you put another groin down south because now you're amplifying your erosion down south. It's a systemic issue, same with seawall, as which was alluded to in South County. So it's just kind of pushing it further down, whereas, so it's not adding sand to the system, it's just collecting sand that's already in the system, but causing downdrift impacts to your neighbors to the south, which there could be some responsibility of placing sand further, there's other challenges that potentially can come from it. So soft solutions, as far as throwing money away or throwing sand away or what have you, artificial placement of sand is the only way that you're actually adding, naturally, beach nourishment, you're only adding sand to the system. You're increasing the amount of sand available to the surrounding beach envelope, your beach profile envelope, your beach section envelope, and adding system sand to the south as well. So a little bit here remains, and some does go further offshore or down along shore and cross shore, offshore. So you do lose some.
We're very lucky that John's Island is putting sand in because we'll get some of that sand, right?
Yeah. John's Island is also just doing a dune project, so their sand has a higher potential to stay on their beach, their immediate system. But some sand, if you put tracers in it and what have you, it may come down to your area. Yeah.
Well, let's ask this question. What if we do absolutely nothing? What happens? If the state refuses to change our designation to critical, and nobody does anything, so what happens to our beaches? This is a section for it.
Okay, so if it maintains the trend that we've seen, it could only accelerate the erosion. I don't think that we're going to see, because typically erosional beaches don't become accretional beaches. That's just the unfortunate reality.
I thought you said we lost 1.8.
You're losing 1.8 cubic yards per shoreline foot per year.
Right.
So in about 5-10 years, we'll have no beach at all.
Based on that current analysis, there'll be further erosion. I mean, sand comes in and out. There's other projects that might be influencing it. So that's all factored into the sediment budget. But not doing anything could perhaps erode the primary dune even further. There could be some natural accretion. There's sand out there that's sitting there from the storms that could migrate back on the shore.
So the county and then the neighborhood shore cares somewhat. It doesn't seem like the county cares a whole lot about the state. I mean, if their beaches start going away,
okay.
in the state of Florida, that's not a very good thing.
Okay. And Sal, I can understand your Yep. And Sal, I can understand the frustration, just like everybody's frustration. But the county does care. I mean, to a point where we are pushing forward, and maybe there could be dissension amongst us. But we are looking at trying to get that designation or assist the town, assist the community with that designation. That's not an absolute. As I said before, designating this area is not an absolute that there's going to be a project or there's going to be anything of that nature. It just provides us another opportunity for the town, county, state, and federal government, FEMA, to all work together to try to come up with some solutions or a project and end solutions if the project erodes or what have you. So it gives us a mechanism to move forward with trying to look at a systemic type of project here.
During those fours hurricanes, Caledon Shores, Condo, on it would be still north of Jason Park. They had baffles that I don't know when they put them in, but I remember because we were here at that time. The baffles did get uncovered, but it seemed like the sand came back faster. Are they the same as the sea fences? Are they considered the hard?
that's
They
another,
ran
yeah,
horizontal.
that's
in
another
front of-
armoring. So that's a sand-filled container system.
Yeah.
So that's like a seawall. They have it shaped in or designed in a way that it's a little bit more of a sloped type armoring because
I
there's
just know
bags.
they
Yeah.
didn't lose as much of the dune to affect the towns, like, I can't remember
Yeah.
the name of it, of the condo, right
Ocean
across
Club.
from Village Market.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Where
Ocean
the
Club.
inside-
Yep, the Ocean Club was all eroded back.
Yeah.
And again, that's case in point. There's reasons behind that. That Caledon actually
Okay.
increased it potentially, but that is another. But that's for Ocean Club to figure out. But so that system did become uncovered. It did maintain the primary dune.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what a seawall would do. In a storm event, your primary dune would be essentially armored, hard
I just
armored.
remembered it.
Yeah, but they have
protected
Yes.
buildings and
Yes.
stuff compared to up Bay Tree
correct.
and pools in these houses just north of Beachcomber. It eroded all the way back to the
Yes.
islands from the houses and
Yes.
we needed to get sand
Correct.
in.
And with that system, the state actually requires Caledon Shores to cover that back up if it becomes exposed. Because of turtle nesting, there's got to be a 3 to 4 foot sand layer on top of them. So they're almost annually recently, they've been restoring their dune system to cover up that system. So yes, they have it protected, they put less sand out there, but they still have to put sand out there to keep it covered because of environmental concerns. Yes, ma'am.
I come from a place in Michigan where we have challenges every so many years. One year we have 110 feet of beach, and a couple of years later we'll have nothing. We've lost houses. I come from an area that has about 4.5 miles of beach and 200 cottages. We've lost a couple cottages over the years. We don't have tides that you have. We do have a cycle that seems to occur, high water and low water. But we did put in our area huge boulders. We just brought them in on a ship, just dropped them, and that has really helped. Now, is there some reason you can't do that here?
Yes, so boulders or revetments are another way to armor the shoreline. We can't do it here. Unfortunately, because of, or fortunately, unfortunately, way we want to look at it, sea turtles. So you're reducing the habitat. So that's, sea turtles are endangered species and they're threatened or protected. So we really have to work in this whole ecosystem and that's why. So big boulders, granite boulders don't unfortunately
Let me
work.
ask you this then, in section 4, if we're going to beach, I can see sort of later. Give me the
Good
the
question.
rates, the high cottage,
Good
right
question.
back up.
And that's one of the points that we're highlighting.
You're the endangered species.
Yeah. And that's exactly case in point. Even though there's sensitivity around that distinction or that assertion with saying, okay, turtles, they don't have any habitat, no beach, no nesting habitat. So it's a fine line that you have to walk when you make that point clear. And the way we're supporting that point is we are showing nesting data. We're adding that wildlife data into this letter or as an attachment to our letter to show the trend. And actually these escarpments have impacted turtle nesting where they either get collapsed onto a turtle and suffocate them or now the surf is washing them out. So historically high nesting beaches now being impacted by no sand. That's a problem in the wildlife issue concerns and the folks that make those decisions. So, yes?
To clarify and get back to the beginning of this discussion, the advocation of changing the designation of this area, will that in any way obligate the residences along the beach financially or to any particular process?
To get the designation made, that's all part of the state and local tax dollar base to start those discussions. As far as that letter sending transmission, there's no expense. You're essentially, we're working on your behalf as public entities. Down the road, I can't answer that question. I don't know if the town, the county, the other funding sources down the road, that might have to come from others, perhaps even The community, I don't know. The community has already spoken. I think that we have a beach committee in the county. There's been multiple discussions about Sector 4. We've had discussions through everyone here with the administration from the county and the town. There's been letters generated. The 13th, we're going forward with the other letter to the state. So once that's submitted, we'll have the ball out of our court, essentially. It'll be in DEP's court. And I like to use that analogy all the time because I don't like to have a lot of, things floating around. I like to pass it on to somebody else so we can kind of work on it and follow that. It's just there's so much other stuff that we have to worry about. We want to pass it on. So once we submit that letter, obviously I will contact through our beach committee or what have you, or another medium, that the letter has been transmitted. So a follow-up to that, if we don't hear any response or any progression, then that's when you guys get together again and say, okay, where are we in this analysis, or an update from me, and then we can get the legislator, the representatives and senators kind of involved. So I wouldn't push it too much. I would let us handle it now. You've already done your part. Let us do our part, and then we'll go on to the next phases of this interaction. I think, there's one here and then, okay.
In terms of timing, is there any limitation to when we're allowed to add sand to the beaches because of the nesting seasons and things like that?
You guys are really on top of it today. Excellent questions. Okay, so the permits that I've authorized, actually, mostly the state permits or the county permits, you have until February 28th to place sand on the beach. Sea turtle nesting season starts March 1st and goes through October 31st. So as it is right now, again, all equipment on the beach, all sand placement through that emergency final order, Johns Island's going through it as well, has to be February 28th unless the state comes back with consultation with FWC that an extension into early part of nesting season is warranted for access issues, sand supply issues, or what have you. They make that determination, and from what I'm seeing right now, March 15th is the absolute deadline. So your permit right now, unless I hear otherwise, for Victoria and also Ocean Colony and such, expires February 28th.
It sounds to me like if we're not doing anything, we're waiting on the system to work. I'm very anti-system, but I know you've got to live with it. Each one of us, different communities, is going to run home and say, we need to add some sand to our beach and do something on our own, because it's going to be a long time till we get any help from the government. Would it not benefit our communities to work together in trying to do some re-nourishment? Because it sounds to me like that's what we need to do in the short term, but not interfere with what eventually will happen. And if we could form some kind of a coalition, we don't each then have to hire a maritime engineer to come in and guide us. We hire one for the whole sector 4 and split the cost. It seems like that would be much more advantageous. Or is that something the city would do? To form that kind of a group, or do we do it?
I can't speak for other members of town council.
No, that's correct.
This subject has obviously come up. Mike Oxner and I have been working with the Beaches Recreation with James on this, but we're really early on this. So the first thing is, as James pointed out, is to get the DEP designation. Without that, you can't really do much of anything.
So as far as to continue some of the discussion, as far as doing the project and so forth, large-scale beach projects do take a time. The permitting on that is usually on a brand new nourishment project, 18 months. And there's all the reasons behind that. So we can get into it if you want, but for the timing. So we're faced with that in any sector that we even designated critically eroded sectors. So the same question has come up with Sector 3, or the residents within Sector 3, or other sectors where there's planned beach projects and things. My recommendation, because of the timing and everything else, is to do a smaller scale project. Yes, it's an expense and so forth to private homeowners and such, which I can feel your pain. I just had to put a new roof on my house, and it was $16,000. It's a lot of money. I know that, but it's the responsibility of the homeowner to protect their property, and I say that without malice. But it is, at this point, I look at it as you're kind of, unfortunately, in this timetable, this gray area, that if you want to do a project, then you do your project, and then hopefully we can go to the next level on a larger scale project. But again, I'm a reality factual person, so I'm very upfront, and a number of you know that, and then that's I'm not.
Are they dune projects or are they beach projects?
They're both. So we have, because of other concerns, natural hard bottom and so forth, we can't cover that sand. So our fill densities are reflected on how we expect that beach to perform or that sand placement to perform. So more sand you put out there, the more likelihood it's going to cover that resource. We'll have to mitigate that resource at the natural reef at $1 million an acre or so forth. So that's not in the county's focus. So we have we're designing projects that provide the most benefit to the infrastructure, the dune infrastructure, beach infrastructure. We are in some areas, yes. In Sector 5, Sector 3, and Sector 7 areas, we are putting sand in the beach or in the water, but limited amount of it.
Because a private development can't do that.
They can't. It all has to be above mean high water, and actually above, in some respect, seasonal high water mark.
And the problem is, without you doing that part, it's a waste of time for us to do our part.
Yeah, it would be very difficult for where you can't do it.
The narrow beach, we're putting sand on our dune and it's going to be gone. It could be gone next summer. Hopefully it'll be there 10 years.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question that you probably don't have the answer to. When does the property tax structure change on beach? And the county, serious, it's that simple.
Taxes play a big role in a lot of the infrastructure west of town. The Barry Island taxes. You don't have much infrastructure here. Private property, so it's an important discussion. To have. Pay a lot of taxes.
They'll have to change the additional beach.
That would be something that you would have to discuss with our property.
No, but that will be the issue.
Majorly, that could be an issue.
You said no giant boulders or, what about
A seawall.
seawalls? To protect your private property?
Seawalls, you can apply to the state for a seawall permit. If Victoria as a whole, POA or what have you, wanted to do that, that's, within your protection or your statute. You're allowed to do that with Florida statute.
They help.
And
How much do they help?
they make determination. They don't pay for it. The DEP won't pay for it. The engineering, the surveys, everything else that goes into a seawall for anyone, even the county, DEP wouldn't cost share on that.
Thank you. I want to interrupt just a moment. I know you've got another meeting to go to. What's your time frame? Do you need to go now?
I've probably got like 15 minutes.
Okay. I know some folks wanted to go down on the beach and let him talk a little bit about some of the things down there. Are there people that want to go down to the beach with him? So have you got time to do that now?
That's fine.
Then I'd like everybody then to come back up here and we can talk about if there's anything that the group is going to try to go forward with. Diana?
So
Thank you.
it's 50 or 60,000 for Victoria to do sand right now. If Victoria and Ocean Colony both wanted to do seawalls along 800 feet or whatever, what would that cost?
It really depends on your site, just to caveat that. But from what I try to keep up with industry and so forth, it's about $1,500 per linear foot to do a seawall. And that's plus or minus, or whatever, but on average, $1,500 a linear foot to do a seawall with the engineering and everything else. So 100 feet, $150,000.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And so forth is finding creative ways to bring the sand and get the sand. Pumping is
I apologize for the sound of the audio at this part of the tape. It's because of the wind blowing. I've done everything I can to mitigate it, so you may have to turn your volume up a little bit.
The question was dredging or bringing in sand from a dump truck or something along that lines. The cost to mobilize a hopper dredge is $1.5 million at least. So if you guys want to and get 1,500, and if you get 1,500 cubic yards of sand, then that number might have to be adjusted. Sorry, that's $50,000 estimate. Yeah, the sand is sitting there, and the majority of it is sitting there. A lot of it's down in here. Don't know if it'll be that high. I mean, if it is, run, because the contractor's not very business. They're looking at it from a profit standpoint. Yeah, I would figure 50 to 75 is probably the number that you should be. That's planting is extremely inexpensive. You know, maybe $1,000 in the grant. Everybody hears the same thing. No, okay. And so, as an explanation purpose, you know, the shoreline here, obviously the dune has retreated, so you've lost 10, 15, or more feet the last couple of hurricanes, Matthew and Irma. So, because of the condition of the beach and so forth, the berm system, the whole profile, you can't rebuild that. Or you can, but it wouldn't be fruitful. It would be expensive to wash it away, and that sand, the question that was asked before, why are we putting sand out or whatever, that washes away, case in point. So the recommendation here would be kind of a hybrid of that. Maybe do like a 5-foot or so dune crest, like a flat portion of the beach crest, and your permit actually has that in there, and 3-to-1 slope, which is required from there down. So if you extend this escarpment, and everything's based on, you know, the elevation of the escarpment, let's just say it's 5 feet for argument's sake. So a 3-to-1 slope from 5 feet, that's 15 feet extended. So now you put another 5 feet on and extend that out further, it's another 15 feet. So you're looking at a footprint, seaward footprint, of almost 30 feet if you did what I recommended. So now if you built back your dune 15, 20 feet, you've got that plus another 15 feet from there or thereabouts, you're sitting at mean high water mark. So that's all based on observations here and then just what's expected. So you really want to look at a project area, 1,500 cubic yards is what your authorization was for Victoria. Should be adequate to do what I just recommended, 5-foot, 3-to-1 slope, with you know, plus or minus a couple yards of there in balance. And then that flat portion of the beach, or the crest, could be revegetated, but I would recommend it revegetated with grassy vegetation. If you are going to go that next step. I mean, aesthetically, vegetation, not sea grapes. You don't want to put sea grapes on there because you got to look at it as a sacrificial. And I don't want to be, again, the reality is you want to look at this sand that you're putting out there as somewhat sacrificial. So it's going to be redistributed, moved around, you might get enhanced, you might get eroded a little bit. So revegetating that with expensive hardwood vegetation would be, it wouldn't be prudent to do that.
Do you recommend replacing sea grapes that are brown and dead?
Those are fine. That's normal. They're a species that's indigenous to the area. They're used to sand, wind, salt. You know, so their species are, you know, it's prime for this ecosystem.
They have more strength, short and tall. JI cuts
question. They have similar strength. If you cut them or not, they push out or whatever. It's for view purposes, probably John's Island. But the thing is, you don't want to remove them. So that's where the issue would be. So keeping them
they're not as strong.
it depends. It depends on really how much dune it has. I mean, I'm not a botanist, so I don't know the full, root structure and everything else of a sea grape. But from what I've seen, trimming it, as long as you don't remove it or trim it too low or you kill it or anything of that nature, that doesn't necessarily harm it. You just want to have, the higher it is, the more protection you have from wind and light and everything else that's coming out. So a healthier sea grape is what I would rather see as a coastal engineer. But that doesn't always work with the aesthetics.
I understand that the state has a requirement that you cannot cut the sea grapes along the village longer than 4 feet.
So that requirement is basically you can't trim any more than a third of the sea grape. So, and it has to be above 6 feet in order to do that trimming of a third. So if that, it's just cleaning. So 21 foot sea grape, you can only do it 7 feet, roughly. And then what happens is, okay, so that third is above 6 feet, it's, 14 feet now, well, okay, you trim it again, and then you're within the permit, but it's not necessarily the best thing for the dune system to keep trimming on an annual basis, lower and lower. Obviously, you get what other communities are kind of achieving to do for the visual.
In your opinion, is the beach as good as it's going to get?
I think we're in store for a nor'easter season. February, March is not necessarily the best time of year for us. We get strong winds, northeast storms typically. So that has several effects. It could actually erode, depending on wave angle and everything else, wind. It could erode the dunes further, or actually that strong surf could push sand back that's offshore back on the beach. So it's hard to predict, but I in absence of another nor'easter that we had from that bomb storm or whatever the heck they called it. I was actually, coincidentally, I was up north when it snowed. My kids got to see snow as an aside, which is great. I loved it. They were running around, but it caused traveling and caused beach erosion. So in absence of that type of storm, I don't necessarily believe you would see additional dune erosion, maybe some profile lowering, just based on history, in this area. And again, hopefully it will push the sand back up, cover some of this vegetation that, is along shore. Doesn't look like there's trash. You guys, raked it, obviously. And so that's what my recommendation would be. If you're going to move forward, the funding obviously is an issue potentially, or what have you. But really, it's the aesthetic, it's the safety. Making sure that the dune doesn't erode anymore, kids don't play in it. So you got to look at it from all angles. And if this was a county park, and I had a beach access without a crosswalk and so forth, I would probably have to put sand out just to protect it, people getting down safely or what have you. If you didn't have these walkways and such, do you have to do a project? No. But is it a good opportunity through that emergency final order permit to do a project without any cost associated with permitting or the other complications with engineering and all this other stuff? It's already done because it's emergency, and essentially you're referring to the county to make a recommendation for you, and I'm included, I guess. So
what
I mean. So
cost?
Typically, it can range a couple $100. Depends on what other surveys or anything else that the department may require.
We are included in that permit?
You have a permit, yeah.
Until February
28th.
So if we're going to do something, we need to start doing something now.
I would strongly encourage that if you are going to move forward. And again, you're not, the way the beaches are here versus south, where Sal's dealing with, unfortunately, Ocean Colony, where they have a very high dune system, a 10-foot, 15-foot escarpment. that's a different scenario. They more than likely have to do a project. Again, you can roll the dice and wait and see, but we're going to get into another hurricane season. So it's really, do you want to lose? You got to look at yourself too, and when you're looking at this, your sea grapes are already kind of falling on the beach. Do you want to, are you comfortable with losing another 5-10 feet of that and then having to do a project? Or do you want to do a project now to at least give your dune system an opportunity to protect its primary, or your sand to protect the primary dune?
Is the cost for that the same? I mean, we're not doing the whole project, is the cost the same?
So for doing,
We're just doing
oh, if you're doing just that, well, you're authorized under that. So your permit covers, Victoria's permit covers this section of shoreline. So you can do that. So the cost, if you just did a section of that, if I'm understanding, there's no cost under that permit. But if you went to the state next year and we didn't have any storms, I'm sorry, you would have to go through the coastal construction control line permitting through the department, and there is cost to that. There's engineering costs to that. There's others. So that could amplify or increase your cost by maybe a couple $1,000. So.
Thank you. We're
Yep.
just
Okay.
thrilled to have you here.
Thank
you very much for
I do. No problem. Happy to